So the Tennessee Titans have done it. They have fired Mike Mularkey. In my last video, I talked about who should replace Terry Robisky, but you can just go ahead and throw that list right out the window because it's irrelevant anymore. We're not looking at people to be a good offensive coordinator. We're looking for a good head coach. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about building the perfect coaching staff, and I'm going to do that from the head coach down. So we got to have a good head coach in place first. That's the foundation. Then we got to get good offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, and positions coaches. In that last video, I actually talked about 3 reasons why Mike Mularkey wasn't going to get fired, and 1 was because of his relationship with Amy Adams Strunk, the owner. 2 was because he was cheap, and 3 because the team still owed Ken Wisenhunt money, but that wasn't the case. They went ahead and gave him the boot anyway. From what I've gathered on Twitter and the Titans website and people like Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport, from what I've gathered from all of these guys, that Mike Mularkey, he was safe yesterday until he went up and did his press conference, and the team did not like a lot of what he had to say. One thing was he talked about Terry Robisky doing a good job. They asked John Robinson about Terry Robisky, and here's what John Robinson had to say. Robinson said, I like Robisky, or I like Terry. He didn't call him Robisky. He said, I like Terry. He has a good relationship with our players, and there's a lot that goes into game planning, and that translates to Terry didn't do a very good job coordinating, calling plays, and that's just completely obvious. Another thing that Mike Mularkey did that a lot of people hadn't really caught on to, but a lot of times Mike Mularkey would sneak in smug comments directed towards fans when the reporters or the guys there who was asking the questions would say, well, the fans have been outraged about this, the fans are concerned about this, and he always says, I'm not worried about the fans, they don't know what's going on, they don't know the full story, or I'm not worried about them, I'm worried about the guys in our locker room. What? We pay your bill, you're the reason that you've got a job here. I mean, if we never watched the Tennessee Titans, if we never cut on the TV while they was on, do you think they would be in business? Vice versa, meaning you would have a job? No, they would not. John Robinson, on the other hand, John Robinson, I'm going to do what's best for the team. I love our fans. Our fans is very important to me. The state is very important to me. This team is very important to me. Bringing a championship home to them is the main thing. John Robinson makes it abundantly clear he cares about the fans. Mike Mularkey, not so much. Now, let me make this clear because that does sound like I'm being a little hard on Mike Mularkey. I do like Mike. He did some really good things for us here. He built a system that it fit the needs of our quarterback along with what he wanted to do. He kind of tried to compensate or compromise what he wanted to do to what the team's strengths were, and it worked to a certain extent. He laid a good foundation for us, taking us from 3-13 to consecutive 9-7 seasons. So he did do good things, but of course he also had his flaws. So let's talk about some guys who could replace Mike Mularkey and building the perfect staff around them. Doing this, I kind of consider people who have had past relationships with the Titans, since the Titans do have somewhat of a hometown pride kind of thing going on. It's not very big, but it's got a little bit of it. But I also looked at who's proven, who's available, what the rumors are going around are, who would be good for Mariota, and all this other stuff. So let's go ahead and jump into who could replace Mike Mularkey. And we'll start out with Mr. Obvious, and that is Josh McDaniels. He's been rumored to be linked to Tennessee before Mike Mularkey ever even got the job. But rumors are right now that he is going to sign with the Colts and be the Colts' next head coach. But there's also rumors around that Josh McDaniels would rather be the coach of the Tennessee Titans than he would the Indianapolis Colts. So take that how you want it. Now, if we're talking about his understaff, we could look at someone like Mike McCoy, who was his offensive coordinator in Denver in 2009. And now a lot of people are not going to like the Mike McCoy, but and they got reason. They think of him as the failed head coach for the then San Diego Chargers. They think of him as a failed offensive coordinator for the Denver Broncos this past year. And they think of him as having ties to Ken Wisenhunt. But there's just some people who make better coordinators than they do NFL head coaches. The thing with Mike McCoy is he has a long work history of being good at working with quarterbacks and wide receivers. And what does this team have? We have a young, ultra-talented quarterback And we've got some young wide receivers on the outside as well. And not only is Mike McCoy good at working with quarterbacks and wide receivers, Josh McDaniels is also good at working with quarterbacks. So that would be very important. That would be a very good hire for us. The only thing that I would worry about just a little bit is how would our defense do, or not our defense, but our running game? I'm going to get to defense in just a second, but how would our running game do? Would we kind of walk away from that? Would we kind of turn our backs on that with the hire of Josh McDaniels when that is our bread and butter? That is how our team is built right now, and that is how John Robinson talked about building this team in the past. Would Josh McDaniels be able to stick to that formula, stick to the pieces that we have in place, and move ahead of that? Because John Robinson, in his interview today, or his press conference today, he mentioned maximizing the talent we have now. He mentioned that 6 times in his 22-minute interview. So that is obviously going to be very important. On the defensive side of things, you could look at someone like Eric Mangini, who is also with Josh McDaniels on the Patriots. He was their defensive coordinator. He went to be with the Jets and be their head coach, and he had 3 good seasons with the Jets before he got fired there. But he's also very famous for the whole Spygate investigation on the Patriots. So I don't know if Josh McDaniels would have some hard feelings there or not, but I know Bill Belichick definitely does. Seen a lot of stuff about that while I was doing the research for this. So now let's go ahead and knock 3 candidates out right here together, and that's because all 3 of these guys come from the same team. The first one being someone who has a history with the Tennessee Titans. He's our former defensive coordinator. That is Jim Schwartz. And if Jim Schwartz were to come in, I don't think Dick LeBeau would stay. I think more than likely we should keep Dick LeBeau at least as a consultant or something of some sort because he's just too valuable. But talking about Jim Schwartz, a heck of a defensive coach, very good defensive coach, and I feel like his style of football would match the pieces that we already have in place. But he's going to need some good offensive coaches on the other side of the ball. He can take care of our defense. He can get our defense to an elite level. And if you look at the 4 teams left in the NFL right now, 3 of the 4 have an elite defense. The other one has Tom Brady. You look at the Jaguars, they have Blake Bortles and an elite defense. They're in the AFC Championship. You look at the Philadelphia Eagles, they lost their borderline elite quarterback in Carson Wentz, but they have a killer defense and they're in the NFC Championship game. You look at the Minnesota Vikings, they have Case Keenum, and they're in the NFC Championship game. 3 ultra-dominant defenses, and I have no doubt that Jim Schwartz could get us there. He's coached a lot around the NFL in defense. He would move our scheme back to a 4-3 scheme. If you think about it, that is where Jarrell Casey was most dominant, where he had those back-to-back, I believe it was, 10-sack seasons. Derek Morgan could go back to playing defensive end, where he's not been that much more productive as a standing up outside linebacker than he was as a hand in the dirt defensive end. I feel like he is a little more productive as a standing up outside linebacker, but he's got that ability to play and rush from the defensive end standpoint, and I believe Jim Schwartz could get us to that elite defense. We got some young pieces on defense that could really take a big step forward next season. As for the offensive side of the ball, I feel like John DeFilippo, however you say his name, he's a quarterback coach there for the Eagles. He was the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns in 2015 before he became the Eagles quarterback coach, where Josh McCown had a career year. So did Gary Barnidge, tight end. He had a career year. So you look at that and you say you got these 2 veterans who haven't done much their entire career, but with this guy as their coordinator, they had career years. Very, very solid years. Gary Barnidge, you could even say, was borderline an elite year for a tight end. So you look at that. You look at our quarterback. He can help our quarterback, Marcus Mariota. You can also look at what he's done with Carson Wentz. And then this team, we love to use our tight ends. That's one of our biggest strengths with Delanie Walker. So if he could do that with Gary Barnidge, think about what he could do with Delanie Walker. As long as he can make the play calling and does a fine job with that, this team could be set. The next one is on the other side of the ball with the Philadelphia Eagles, and that is Frank Reich, I believe is how you pronounce his name. Like I said, I read these guys. I don't listen to their name. I read about them. I see their credentials. I've seen where they've been. I see what they've done. But you look at things. He's the offensive coordinator for the Eagles. You look at Carson Wentz again. He plays a big step. He plays a big part of why he's taking a step forward in year 2. He's a good play caller. He's gotten the Eagles to the NFC Championship game, even winning a playoff game without his quarterback Carson Wentz. And he spent time around the league also coaching and helping other quarterbacks. As for his offensive coordinator, I would say, again, I would go with John DeFilippo. Now, there's a chance that this wouldn't work because the Eagles could very well promote him up to an offensive coordinator if if John Ratch was to leave. Which John Ratch, he's not getting a lot of hype to be a head coach. He did last year. He's not this year. I don't really understand why. But on the defensive side of the ball, I say Chris Wilson from the Eagles, the defensive line coach, would be a good defensive coordinator for this guy. Now, I've looked into his past and I look at everywhere he's been, and I honestly feel like this will be the best situation. He's done a great job coaching defensive lines. He's also has experience as a defensive coordinator slash head coach assistant for Mississippi State. He's worked with players like Fletcher Cox. You see what he's doing for Derek Barnett this year. He's having a very good year as a rookie who's playing as a rotational piece. And he also worked with Leonard Williams at USC. So I feel like, again, we got a young defense, the front seven. We need to add some more youth to that. And if we do and have this guy as a coach, it could take a big step forward. And the last guy from the Philadelphia Eagles will be John DeFilippo himself. I've done mention some of his credentials. Somebody he could bring in to be his offensive coordinator would be Tony Sparano, who's currently the Minnesota Vikings offensive line coach. But John DeFilippo has experience with him. He was the offensive line coach slash assistant head coach for the Raiders while John DeFilippo was there. And he also was the interim head coach for the Raiders after they fired their coach. And I believe it was 2015, maybe. I can't remember the exact year. It was either 14 or 15. I believe it was 15. But also one of the credentials for John DeFilippo I didn't mention was he also worked with Derek Carr as a rookie. And that year, Derek Carr had the second most complete completions of any quarterback in their rookie year who played a full season, and had the it was either the most completions and fewest interceptions or the fewest interceptions and second most completions. I can't remember. It was one of the two, but still very impressive. He was the quarterback coach that year, so that would be a very good hire. On the defensive side of the ball, he could bring in someone like Joe Woods, who's never had his opportunity to be a defensive coordinator, but he's been a defensive back coach for years now. He's been a lot of places. He's had a lot of success, including being the Denver Broncos defensive back coach for the last 3 years. And you know, the previous 2 years, Denver was known as the no-fly zone. But in this situation, I believe it would be best to retain Dick LeBeau if you're bringing in a guy with no defensive coordinator experience. You want to retain Dick LeBeau and kind of let him help the younger guy who doesn't have experience coaching or being over an entire defense on his own. So that would be a good keep there. And let me just go ahead and throw this in there. There's a trend in this. If there's ever a head coach I mentioned without an offensive coordinator, or if there's a head coach I don't mention a quarterback coach, it could be Byron Leftwich of the Arizona Cardinals. He's had consideration for head coaching positions in the past. He was their quarterback coach. I don't know if they're going to retain him or not, but if we could get him as a quarterback coach, that would be great. Or even as an offensive coordinator, that would be fine and dandy as well. Along with Dick LeBeau, unless mentioned otherwise, it would be a good idea to go ahead and keep him, unless the scheme's different, because then you got two guys that are going to butt heads, and it would be fine and dandy, and it would actually be great if we had two very good defensive-minded coaches. Like I mentioned before, an elite defense wins championships. If we had two great defensive-minded coaches who can kind of collaborate together and work together and compromise and take their play or take their game or take our game to a whole nother level. But if they're going to bump heads, we either don't need to bring one guy in, or we need to let Dick LeBeau go. And the other coach on our staff that I believe we need to absolutely retain is Russ Grimm, offensive line coach. He's a Hall of Fame player, very smart man. You've heard me talk about him in the past if you watched my videos before. So definitely need to keep those three guys in mind as we go ahead and go on through this list. And Pat Shurmur was going to be on this list because technically he is not allowed to sign with the New York Giants just yet, and I was definitely going to have him on my list, but I went to Wiki to kind of look at where he's been and what he's done aside from coaching the Cleveland Browns and the Philadelphia Eagles, to kind of get a better feel for him and see who he's worked with in the past. But according to Wiki, he's already the coach for the New York Giants. So if that's what he wants to do, fine. We can figure something else out without him and still win and still be a good team. So also what I'd like to throw in there is the Titans have actually reached out to Mike Vrabel, however you say his name, from the Houston Texans, defensive coordinator there, for an interview, which his system, or the Texans system, is different from the Titans, but it has a few similarities, so maybe he could work with Dick LeBeau if Dick LeBeau decided to come back and we decide to retain him. So possibly that might actually work. So let's go ahead and look at a few more coaches and we'll get out of here. Steve Wilks is the next guy on my list. He's the defensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers, who have the number 7 overall defense. And again, this is a guy who Dick LeBeau probably wouldn't stick around if we hired him because the scheme is completely different. He would install a 4-3 scheme, which the Panthers had the number 7 overall defense this past year. So that could be a very good hire for us if we pulled the trigger on him. As far as offensive coordinator could go, he could bring in someone like Ron Turner, who's coached quarterbacks and wide receivers around the league for years now. He's also spent time in the college ranks. He was the offensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears in 2008 when Steve Wilks was actually there. And he's currently a consultant for the Carolina Panthers. So if he wants to step back into the coaching gig, this could be an opportunity for him. As far as defensive coordinator goes, the team doesn't really need one. Back whenever Jim Schwartz was the head coach for the Detroit Lions, he didn't have a defensive coordinator. The position was vacant. So if the head coach is a defensive-minded coach, he doesn't necessarily have to have a defensive coordinator. So I just left that vacant because there's not a lot of information out there on Steve Wilks. Next, we have George Edwards from the Minnesota Vikings. He's the defensive coordinator. He has been since 2014. That defense has been elite for probably about 2 or 3 years now, and it's just now starting to get the credit for that. So George Edwards would be a good candidate. As far as offensive coordinator for this guy would go, if we did hire him, I've actually got 2 choices for you here. The first one being Darrell Hazel. He's the wide receiver coach for the Minnesota Vikings. He's got 30 years of coaching experience, including a head coaching job at the University of Purdue and a head coach job at Kent State. But you look at what he's doing for the wide receivers there in Minnesota. Look what Adam Thielen is doing and Stephon Diggs. Look what these guys are doing. And I consider these guys to be pretty average. I think Stephon Diggs is a little above average. But these guys are having Pro Bowl years, both of them. And they got Case Keenum, quarterback, throwing them the football. So awesome job there. I think he would be a good hire for George Edwards if we were to go ahead and hire him to be our head coach. Again, this is a guy who's not really getting any publicity or any hype in the head coaching searches. Teams just aren't looking at him. But, I mean, it wouldn't be a bad hire if we did make the hire. The next offensive coordinator spot for this guy that I'm going to throw out there is Kevin Stefanski. He's the longest tenured Minnesota Vikings coach on their current staff. He's the quarterback coach, and look what he's doing with Case Keenum. Not only that, look what he did with Sam Bradford last year on the fly. So he's also got experience coaching running backs and tight ends for the Vikings. He's had success there. I believe he just needs to get an opportunity, and maybe he can do something with it. He's got experience working with multiple positions. He's going to be able to help multiple guys on the roster. But how's his play calling? We don't know. It isn't proven, as it isn't with a lot of these guys on this list. So maybe the guy just needs a chance. I feel like he could help us technique-wise, especially get back to the basics and mastering those. And as for the defensive side of the ball, even though that George Edwards is a defensive-minded coach, I'm going to give him a defensive coordinator, and it's Adam Zimmer. He's the son of Mike Zimmer, and this is kind of taking advantage of a relationship here. My goodness, I got tongue-tied here at the very end. But Adam Zimmer taking advantage of a relationship here. Say something happens, our defense is weak against this, or I can't get guys to respond to this, or what adjustments can I make to cover up this? And say Adam Zimmer can't figure it out. George Edwards is kind of struggling with it too. Adam Zimmer, get on the phone. Hey, Daddy, I'm having this problem. What do I need to do to fix it? And they can kind of consult back and forth. Of course, unless one team is playing the next. That will actually work. Let me give you my experience about this. Back in the day, we used to have a family-owned tire shop. My dad owned it. I worked there. But I was frustrated with my dad because there was things that he wouldn't let me do. It was dangerous work. We changed semi-truck tires, and we didn't have, I guess, what you would call new technology to do these things with. So we was using old tools and changing these things by hand. And a lot of times it could be dangerous work. You know, you got to climb up under there. You got to jack the thing up. That jack falls, you're dead. You got that tire on the rim, and it's just kind of sitting there on it. You got to put the air on it. You got to put some ether up in that tire. A lot of match on it. Make it boom, blow up. You got to make sure you got that tire on the truck good, because that thing comes off there and one of them nuts flies off and hits you. You're either going to be dead or very badly hurt. And they're just working on the side of the interstate. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. But anyways, my dad and I, we kind of didn't see eye to eye. There was things I wanted to do that he didn't want me to do. There was things that I felt we could do to grow the business that he didn't want to take the risk on. So I ended up getting a job managing a tire shop about 8 miles. This is on the side of the interstate now. We live in a town just about 2 miles from the interstate, and our tire shop was on the interstate. So I got a job about 8 exits down from him managing a tire shop there. And man, the guy who owned the tire shop, all he had was junk. His tools were junk. Nothing seemed to work like it was supposed to work. And I got a truck come in, and his tires were all junk and old school tires, like they've probably been on there since the 1950s. And boy, I was having some trouble with this. I called my daddy. I said, Daddy, can I borrow some of the tools up there at the shop? You know, some of the stuff that we don't use a whole lot. And he said, yeah, just bring it back to me. And he helped me out. And there was a few times that he helped me out, because there was another time where we had a tire that I can't remember exactly what it was, but the rim was damaged, and I didn't recognize it until I got the tire off and was putting the next tire back on. And they was trying to accuse me of damaging the rim, and I called my dealer. They're trying to accuse me of this. They're trying to say they're going to sue me and all this other crap. And he looked at us and said, no, they can't sue you for that. And that's why I was trying to tell them, but they wouldn't listen to me because I was only like 19 at the time. So, but anyways, Adam Zimmer could have that same type of relationship, I believe. And maybe on the flip side of things, what could benefit from him is not only is he stepping up into a higher position, but he's also given himself an opportunity to step out of his dad's footsteps or shadow and show and prove what he can do to everyone else. But anyways, that's my video, guys. I plan on doing an updated 3-round mock draft after the Super Bowl some point that week too, just because there's players who's declaring and not declaring. So I'm going to do an updated 3-round mock draft. So go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Be sure to leave a like if you like the content on the channel. That helps us out a whole lot, and I really appreciate that. Hope you guys have a great day, and I'll catch you next time.